4 years ago, I had a hair transplant. Now, I was always very open about it, and so people as a result have asked me lots and lots of questions over those 4 years. And so I wanted to make this video to maybe help anybody who is considering it, or maybe is just curious, to learn a bit more about how it works, why it works, what the process actually is. And as part of that, I'm going to take you through my journey and the kind of the timescales attached to it. Here is a short preview of some of the things you can expect to see. If you're sensitive to blood, you might want to turn around. In fact, to be honest, this video might not be for you. But here's a short Mission Impossible style snippet trailer. Before I get started, can I please just ask, if you are new to the channel or you've watched any of my videos before and you haven't quite reached for that subscribe button, please do so now. It means you'll get informed of any videos I produce, and they won't all be for you. I accept that. You're not obliged to watch them, but having your subscription makes a big difference. So please, thank you for your support. Right, moving on to today's content. So the hair transplant. So let's start with the what. The clue is in the name. It is, of course, basically the procedure of moving hair from one place to another. Typically, from the back of the head to the top of the head, but not exclusively so. Hair can be taken from other parts of the body and not always for the top of the head. There are examples online of people having body hair moved to create eyebrows, for example. It depends on what your need is, but it's not automatically back of head to top of head, just predominantly. So there are essentially two ways it's done. There's FUE and FUT. So FUE is follicular unit extraction and FUT is follicular unit transplant. Now the commonest one is FUE, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But FUT, how that works basically is cutting a strip, so let's assume it's on the head, cutting a strip of skin from the back of the head where there's lots of hair, and then stitching it back up and taking that strip and basically cutting it into lots of tiny pieces, each one that will be a graft that contains 1 to 4 hairs, and then they will get placed into the head where you want them. And that's literally a case of them putting a hole and then putting the graft in. It's very manual. It sounds super complex, but it's actually an incredibly manual process. FUE is different in the sense that the first part of it is a different process. The second part, it's still putting grafts in the hair where you want it to go, or into the head, sorry, where you want it to go. But the first process, instead of actually cutting the strip, the follicles are actually removed one by one. The easiest way to kind of describe it is using this prop. This is an apple corer, and essentially FUE uses a tiny version of this that has a motor in it. Now what it does is, if you think about how an apple corer works, is it goes in and then you twist it and then that cuts your way through the apple. The miniature version of this that they use on the back of your head is about like 0.5 millimeter across, I think, and it's slightly motorized, so that's moving. And they literally put it against the head, and so it kind of cuts around the follicle, and that allows them to just pull it out. And they put them on, I think it's kind of a gauze with saline in just to keep it sterile and clean. And so it's one after another removing them. That does take a few hours, undeniably, but it's also, the big difference between the two is FUT, which is the strip, that will leave a scar. Now, unless you have your hair short, the chances are no one will ever see it. If you have your hair short, then they're going to see a white line. FUE will leave thousands of scars, but they're tiny, so nobody ever notices them. So essentially, when you cut that out, the skin around it closes, and there's hair follicles still left all around it, and as a result, you don't really see it. So it's a much more subtle process. The big difference is FUT you can actually do without shaving the back of the head. FUE, you have to shave the back of the head because it has to be super, super short for them to be able to see the hairs to be able to get them out. So that in a nutshell is the difference between FUE and FUT. So why does it work? Basically, the key is a hormone called dihydrotestosterone, or DHT. Now what DHT does is it causes on the top of your head, it causes male pattern baldness, basically. So what it does is it interrupts the life cycle of the hair and makes it harder for it to grow until eventually it stops. But what it does for the rest of your body is it causes hair growth. It's a cruelly ironic hormone, but it's super important because it actually forms a key part of kind of male physical development. But the interesting thing is, and not a lot of people would necessarily know this unless you research it, While the side of your head is basically classed as body hair, the top of your head is actually DHT, it's intolerant to it. So DHT really affects on the top, but the back and sides are actually DHT immune. Doesn't make any difference because your body treats that hair like it does any body hair. So what it means is in a transplant, when you move hair from here to here, you're moving DHT resistant hair to the top, which means that over time it won't, its life cycle won't be interrupted and it won't fall out. That's the theory behind it. Now, hair transplants have been around for decades now, and they work. No two ways about it, they work. They estimate you're good for probably 3 to 5 decades, which is fantastic. Things you've got to bear in mind, though, is if you're considering this at this point, if you're in your 20s, 1, good for you, but 2, bear in mind that if you're balding, you've probably not finished. It's going to keep maybe until sort of like your mid-30s, it's going to reach a point, and then it will slow down, I believe. But up to that point, you might see continued movement. So if you have a hair transplant and fill in the front of your forehead, and your hair is still receding, you might end up with a gap and you have to have more procedures. So don't rush into this in your 20s. That's my advice to you. I was 43. So ideally, really, you want to be sort of in your late 30s, 40s, or maybe even higher if you want. Because otherwise your hair is still changing. So be conscious of that. And so on to my own experience. Now I should probably start with the why I had it done. I'll be honest with you, I wasn't particularly super self-conscious about my hairline, but I was conscious of it. I think what it comes down to is that every time I looked at a photo of myself, you kind of have an idea, or even just the mirror, you have an idea of how you look. And every time I looked at myself, I didn't look like that image. And I think that was enough. It was just on my mind enough for me to go and have a free consultation. I was curious. One of my colleagues had shown me photos of her husband who'd had it done, and I was blown away by it. So I went just for a chat. The company I contacted was called Harley Street Healthcare, and I met them in Manchester because I'm in the north. And the guy was really helpful. He wasn't a surgeon, but he was essentially a salesman for them, and he could give advice and make recommendations. So when we chatted, his recommendation was 3 to 3,500 grafts. As you can see from this photo of me before, my hair had thinned quite a lot on top, but also my hairline had just got progressively further back. So it was a bit Bruce Willis-ish, and also the hair at the front, it wasn't even, it was just kind of, off to one side, and it grew really strongly in one direction. So it was really hard to do anything with. So yeah, my consultation with him, he recommended up to 3,500 grafts, and the price they quoted was £5,300, which I had expected. It was around about the ballpark I had in mind. Bear in mind, you can of course pay less and you can of course pay more. It all depends on number of grafts, but crucially it also depends on where you are. There are countries in the world who do a lot of this. Istanbul, I think, is considered to be the hair transplant capital of the world, where it is much, much cheaper. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just cost of services in terms of the team. I don't know. But I chose personally to have it done in the UK because I'm in the UK, and if there was any problems, I wanted to be able to get back in touch with somebody right in front of them without too much travelling. And so this company seemed great for me. So I had this consultation, I decided to go ahead with it, and I went and met the surgeon, and we talked about what they would do. Now obviously a focus for me was filling in these gaps and kind of building this hairline. What they do when they plan that is they're not going to give you a straight line. They tend to give you kind of an imperfect semicircle. The reason it's imperfect is it may be off to one side or something, which they did for me, is because most hairlines simply aren't perfect. So therefore you need that flaw, if you will. And the hair was to come from predominantly the back, a little bit on the sides, basically where my hair was thickest, and then would go at the front, some on top and some at the back on my crown. And so we booked a date in, and very quickly it came around. So I turned up on the day, and this is the actual clinic. If you have a look now, this was in Maida Vale, so I never actually went near Harley Street. And so the first thing they do is they shave all your hair off, which left me looking like this. It's not a look I've ever embraced before. Quite liked it, if I'm honest, but it wasn't something I was sticking with. I like having hair. So they then draw on the targets, which you can look at a photo here. I say targets. This is essentially what they're going to do. So you can see where the hair is at the moment, and they draw on the back of the head as to where they're going to take it from, and then put the line on the front as to where they're going to put it. The procedure itself is one day. So basically in the morning it is them harvesting, horrible phrase but it's true, that's them removing the hair. So mine was the FUE, so it is literally the one at a time. So they spent maybe like 3 hours doing that in the morning, and then you stop for a quick sandwich at lunch, and then in the afternoon is them putting the hair in its new home. So if I show you, this is a bit, if you're not a fan of blood, you might not like this. Here is photo number 1. This is the back of my head having had the hair harvested. I had 2 nurses working on this, removing them, and they take each follicle out and put it on this gauze that I think was soaked in saline, just to keep it fresh, if you will, keep it alive of sorts. Well, actually anyway, to keep it fresh. And then in the afternoon, the surgeon then comes in and basically with a large pin puts lots and lots of holes as to where the follicles are going to go, and then the nurses spend the next 2-3 hours putting each of them into the holes. I should mention, by the way, and I should have opened with this, sorry, you do have a local anaesthetic during all this. So they give you injections in the head. I won't lie to you, the injections in the head are actually probably the most uncomfortable part of the day. The rest is actually okay. But those injections, once they go in, they numb your entire head. And the easiest way to describe the process after that is when they are removing the follicles on the back of the head with the apple corer, is imagine having a bike helmet on and then somebody doing something to the helmet. You can feel it, but you can't feel it. And that was kind of how my head felt all day, which was weird, but it said it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just a bit boring, to be honest. You're just lying still for hours and hours and hours on end. So once they've put those hairs in, and the way the doctors tend to do it is they make these holes, and they make the holes so they are 90 degrees from the head on top, so your hair isn't kind of going in a specific direction, it goes up. And then at the sides they tend to change the angle so it kind of supports the surrounding hairs, because what you don't want is just lots of hair sticking up. It would just look weird, and it will grow like that. So here is my head at the front, and you can see the crown here once these hairs have been put in. It looks weird as hell. It's just kind of bobbly and the follicles stick out a tiny bit. It's really, really unusual. They weren't super keen on me taking photos actually, but I just couldn't resist. So here's what I look like. You'll notice on this one I'm wearing a black band. The reason they give you that to wear, and they encourage you to wear it for at least a week, is that black band, which is just Velcro, which goes below the work at the front and below where they've taken the kind of harvest site at the back, is your head inevitably is going to swell because it's just been abused. And so what this does is you have to have it fairly tight. It physically keeps the swelling above the band. They were talking about some of the horror stories that if you don't wear the band, the swelling can work its way down and you can end up with black eyes. If you Google it, there are quite a few examples of that. So the band is important. Keep that swelling up there and out of the way. Now, the next thing I did, and this is a lesson to anybody considering this, is I live, as I said, in the northwest in England, and I'd gone for this procedure in London, so 200 miles away and a two and a bit hour train journey, and I had to get across London from Maida Vale to Euston to catch the train. You're not allowed to touch your head once you've had this done, so there I am with this black band on, a bandage on the back of my head, and gore on top of my head. So I had to catch the underground looking like that. Now London is quite well known for the fact that people don't tend to talk to each other very much. In the north we chat a lot, ask people how they are. In the south you don't, you kind of keep your head down. That day Londoners looked around at me quite a lot, and even spoke to me a little bit. Like I had one person going, "Is that real?" And it was, because I looked like a Halloween costume. Annoyingly, I also had booked a later train, so I arrived at Euston and had about an hour and a half to kill. So having had the most uncomfortable underground journey of my entire life, I then had to sit in Cafe Nero looking like this, quietly in a corner, hoping nobody would notice me. People did, and some people chatted, and I had to explain what I had done. But on the whole, people were just curious. It was fine. And then I got on the train and I went home and said it was a tough day. So if I can give you any advice, get someone to drive you home at the end of the day, or maybe just plan an overnight in a hotel so you can kind of group yourself together. Or option 3, and I'll explain how I discovered it a little bit later on, is a hat, but a specific hat, and you've got to wear it carefully. But I said I'll talk about that in a bit. So when I got home, I was very cautious about how you slept, so lots and lots of pillows to kind of keep yourself at 45-degree angle, so that basically your head isn't touching anything. You've just got to support just behind here where you've had the hair taken from, but avoiding on top. The reason for that is those follicles, the ones that have been transplanted, they essentially aren't connected to you properly for up to 10 days. It takes 10 days for the body to kind of see them, grab them, and eventually start to give blood circulation to them. So I said about 10 days. So for those 10 days, you've got to be really cautious. So inevitably, the first thing that happens is you end up with scabbing on top. You don't do much with it. After about 5 days, I think, but your surgeon should give you advice and all this, but I think it was 5 days. It was baby shampoo on a sponge and just a gentle dab, nothing more, and being really, really, really cautious. So over time, those scabs get less and less, and you sponge a bit more until, said, probably about 2 weeks in, you are in a much better position to be able to wash it kind of a bit more thoroughly, but still really, really carefully, because you're very cautious of the fact you spent all this money and you want to look after it. So here's some photos of me as time goes by, and I put the date in the bottom corner there so you can see how many days have passed at the point that I'm sharing. As I said, the scabs passed relatively quickly. The redness remained, and the redness at the back remains. And obviously your hair's always been clippered, so it's very visible. So if you go into work, tell people what you've had done. Manage their expectations, otherwise people are just going to be a bit confused, maybe even concerned. So do let them know what you're doing, or if you can work from home with your camera off, your call. So anyway, the next thing that happens is the bit that scares people, and you need to be aware of this, and so your surgeon should make you aware, but just in case, I'll make you aware. After somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks after you've had the transplant, all the stuff that has been implanted at the front, which at this point you're super excited about, by the way, the scabbing's gone and there it is, the hair looks amazing, it will fall out. Pretty much everything that's been transplanted will fall out. And suddenly you'll think, it's failed, it's not worked, I've wasted my money, it's okay, relax, it's perfectly normal. So the process is that hair cycle is, because it's been interrupted by the trauma of being moved from there to there, I said it will fall out. Don't worry, I said it will grow back. But on that point, actually, while I remember, the thing to remember, interesting point, particularly depending on your age, if, for example, you have grey hair around the back and sides and it's dark on top, remember when you move it from there to there, you're moving a grey hair. So when it grows, it will be grey. And vice versa, if you're dark hair and grey on top, then you're moving dark hairs. Be aware of that, because I have very few grey. I'm still quite lucky for a 47-year-old, but some of them are, and some of them got transplanted, and every now and then I'll just get this random white hair that grows at the front. So yeah, side note, but just so you're aware. So anyway, so the hair will fall out. Don't stress, just keep it clean, keep using products to just keep your hair and the scalp in good condition, but nothing abrasive, nothing aggressive. And eventually, and it takes about 6 months, the hair will start to grow back. So that's 5 months of you worrying, thinking, have you wasted your money? So don't panic. After 6 months, it will start to grow. It won't be super thick, but you will start to see it grow. So if I show you some photos here, this is where I'm starting to get the growth back, and it's I'm happy with it. It's starting to look really, really good. It takes about 12 to 18 months to fully grow. So that's when you'll really appreciate the work. So manage your expectations over time. You just have to be patient. Now back to my personal experience. I said I had paid for up to 3,500 grafts. And I thought my procedure went a little bit too quick, so I actually challenged them. I sat there, and if I show you this photo that I showed you earlier, this is the back of my head. I printed that on A4 in high resolution, and I sat and counted the holes. It's true, odd as that may sound, because I didn't think they'd done 3,500. I didn't even think they'd done 3,000. As it worked out, when I counted the holes, I got to just shy of 2,000. So I went back to them and said, I know this isn't an exact science in the sense of counting, and I may have made a mistake, but I've not missed 1,000 holes. I don't think you've done enough. We'll never know if that was a miscommunication on their part, God knows, but they said they were really good about it actually, and booked me back in for another 1,000. So 6 months after the first one, I went back for a second one. So here I am with my hair shaved, again ready for the next procedure. Hairline's looking much better than the first time. As you can see, I'm super impressed about this, about having to shave my head again. But what they were doing this time was there was only so much hair they could take from the back and sides, because obviously they'd taken a lot the previous time, and you leave it too thin at the back. You can't just expect to move it from there to there and not be a repercussion. Your hair is generally thick enough at the back to be able to absorb maybe 1 transplant, but 2, pushing it a little bit. But they booked in to do it, and so they kind of worked around the areas they'd done the previous time. And he decided that because he was looking at where the thin area was, to actually just put this rectangle on top, this kind of square on top. So that's what he did. So the procedure, here we go, here's the back of my head again, beautiful shot, and here is the top of my head with this square of 1,000 grafts. Now bear in mind, when you look at that, you'll see 1,000. Yes, it takes up a fair amount of space on my head, but bear in mind you have tens of thousands of hairs normally on kind of, when you were younger. tens of thousands of hairs, and you probably still do, but you just have less. That's the nature of having a hair transplant. The reason is probably because you know it's gone thinner. Bear in mind, manage your expectations that a transplant, you're just moving them from there to there. This isn't suddenly sprouting new hair, you're just moving it. So you're still going to have less hair. So bear in mind that it's not suddenly going to be as thick as it was when you were a teenager. Don't expect that, you're going to be disappointed. But you can build thickness, and that's going to be through using the right products, making sure you maintain your scalp condition, making use maybe some sort of clay styling products to maybe make your hair stick together and it makes it look thicker. I'll make some recommendations on that in a minute. So anyway, I went back for the second procedure and I had my square on top, and what I learned by this point, having had that horror experience on the tube the first time, is I was catching the train home again. Because as I said, it's a long drive, and so I had gone out and bought a hat in advance, but I bought a hat that was big enough to sit on my black band that was stopping the swelling without touching my head, and here is my hat. So while I looked very much like a Boy George reject, it meant that I didn't get stared at on the train other than for my bad dress sense. So that was quite cool. When I got home, I knew what to expect, so I wasn't anywhere near as concerned about it these days. So here's some shots of the back of my head and the top of my head healing. And as you can see, so it did still stay quite red, but it passed quite quickly. And so I can basically now jump forward to now, 2022. So all the transplant hair has grown. It's all taken. This is my my forehead and hairline now. So it's not super thick, but that's just the nature of it. If you get super close, you can definitely see that it is kind of a series of individual hairs. I'm hoping the camera focused on that there. And I've had it longer and I liked it, and I've had it shorter and I've settled into this, and I quite like this. And you'll see a lot of people with hair transplants, they kind of look like they're trying to be Morrissey. Google it, kids. In terms of the fact they've got kind of this quiff, and it's mostly because this hair that moves from there to there, in my experience, it's quite a lot stronger than the hair that's there around it. So as a result, because it's designed to grow outwards, that's where it's been placed, it's easier to just style it outwards. And so you'll tend to find a lot of people with hair transplants have their hair kind of up like this at the front. Partly it's because they're proud to have hair, and why not? But also it's because that's where the hair's growing. I said I've settled into this style, having tried a few, and I'm really happy with it. I would recommend, if it really bothers you, I would absolutely recommend it. If it bothers you a bit, it's something to consider. So that was kind of where I was, somewhere between the two, I think. But yeah, that's my experience. Hopefully I've answered the kind of questions I normally get asked about the hair transplant, but if you have any, by all means, put them in the chat. I will respond to as many as I can. Two last things before I go. First one, as I said, is make sure you use the right products on your hair once it's all done. I would recommend using something that is designed basically for hair loss. A shampoo that maybe just keeps remember your scalp, your hair is only as good as your scalp, so make sure you keep your scalp hair. So you want a scalp clean, you want a product that is cleansing your scalp but also making sure there's good blood flow, and also ideally something that maybe thickens your hair a little bit, and then follow that up with the right treatment or product. Get something on the scalp for treatment, and then say kind of a clay product. The ones I would recommend are probably these. I've been using, this is Genesis Homme from Kerastase. Available in all good salons, so do have a look and find this. I think it's really good and it's worth using. And the very last thing before I go is, of course, following up my earlier plug, please click subscribe. Those subscriber numbers are really important. They allow me to do more with the channel, and so thank you so much for your support, and thanks for watching. So any questions, give us a shout below, and hopefully I will see you on the next video. Take care, bye bye.